The Green Paleolithic, the Age of Hunters. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, we delve into a history crafted over millennia. A civilization that created the world's first nation-state, invented writing, and built monuments that stand to this day. Pyramids, temples, and golden treasures that we instantly recognize. Yet, the true story of these people remains largely misunderstood. Here is what life in the world's greatest civilization was actually like. Before we begin, if these stories help you fall asleep, please hit like or subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I find it fascinating to watch people from Australia and Norway viewing the same video. Alright, today is ancient Egypt. But before we go anywhere, settle in. Get really cozy. Pillows are good. Blanket is fine. Excellent. Trust me. You open your eyes in darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. Not the kind you are used to, where streetlights seep through the blinds or the soft glow of electronics. This is true darkness. It is 19,000 years ago, and you wake up on the hard ground of a shallow cave in what will one day become southern Egypt. Your body aches. Every inch of your body feels the unyielding stone beneath your thin animal hide. The air smells of smoke from yesterday's fire. Your only defense against the predators that roam the savanna grasslands. Your mouth is dry. Your stomach tight with hunger. This is not a bad dream. It is just a dream for the earliest inhabitants of Egypt. You hear movement outside as the hunters prepare for the day. You are one of them, a nomadic hunter who follows the great herds of wild cattle across this surprisingly green landscape. Yes, green. This is not the Egypt you picture with endless deserts and pyramids. Not yet. The climate is completely different. More humid, more green, with seasonal rains that create lakes and support grasslands filled with animals. Wake up, someone whispers, nudging your shoulder. The oryx are moving. We need to follow them. Oryx massive wild cattle are the lifeblood of your people. They provide meat, hide, bone for tools. Track them, kill them, or starve. It is that simple. You exit the cave into the pre-dawn light. The sky transitions from black to deep blue. Stars are still visible. Unlike your warm bed at home with its reliable roof, here, the elements govern your existence. The morning chill bites your skin, your breath visible in small clouds. Look, your hunting partner points to tracks on the soft ground, fresh, before the sunrise. This is what survival looks like. Reading the minutes signs in nature that most modern people have forgotten how to see. From these tracks, you can tell not just that oryx passed by, but how many, how fast they were moving, and roughly how long ago. Your small band of about 20 people quickly breaks camp. There is no time for breakfast. Eating happens after a successful hunt, not before. Your stomach will have to wait, unlike you, lying comfortably in bed now. These early Egyptians did not have the luxury of regular meals. We need to check the high ground, you suggest, pointing to a rocky outcrop. See which way the herd is moving. A small aside. I spent weeks studying these early hunter-gatherers of pre-dynastic Egypt, and the most fascinating thing is how skillfully they read the landscapes. They knew exactly which plants signaled water nearby, which animal behavior predicted changes in weather. Their survival depended on observational skills we have completely lost. From the high rock, you can see the savannah 4 miles. And there they are, a herd of oryx, maybe 40 animals, grazing peacefully about a mile away from you. Their massive curved horns catch the light of the early morning. If we circle around, your hunting leader says, we can approach against the wind. Now the real work begins. Your group moves with practiced silence, spreading out in a loose formation. This hunt will take hours, slowly stalking the animals, getting close enough to use your weapons effectively. These are not rifles or even bows and arrows. You use spears and throwing sticks, primitive yet deadly in skilled hands. I always wonder how I would fare if I were suddenly transported to this time. I would probably last about half a day before something ate me or I drank bad water. These people were survival machines. The sun rises higher, and the heat intensifies. Sweat runs down your back. Salt stings the scratches from yesterday's trek through the thorny bushes. Your throat is parched. Water is carried in animal bladders and carefully rationed. Every resource is precious. Your group successfully brings down to Oryx after an arduous 6-hour hunt. Now comes the butchering. Using stone tools to carefully separate the meat, organs, hide, and bone. Nothing is wasted. The meat will be divided among the entire group. Some will be eaten today, some dried for preservation. Good throw, the old hunter says, examining your kill. Clean hit. The spirits favored us today. These early people already had spiritual beliefs, tying their survival to forces beyond themselves. They saw patterns in the stars, in animal migrations, in seasonal rains. Their worldview was shaping the very beginnings of what would eventually become complex Egyptian religion. As night falls, your group returns to the cave. The women have gathered roots, berries, and edible plants to supplement the meat. Together, these foods provide just enough nutrition to survive. A fire is lit, and the meat is cooked. Wait, it gets more interesting. These very early inhabitants of Egypt left evidence of their existence, not in pyramids or papyrus, but in something even more personal. High on the rocky bluffs in places like Korta, about 100 kilometers south of Luxor, they carved images of the animals they hunted. So, imagine this. After eating, with a full belly for the first time today, the elder takes a stone tool and begins to work on the rock wall of your shelter. In the firelight, they carefully chip away pieces, creating the unmistakable outline of an oryx. This is not just decoration. It is a kind of hunting magic, a way to connect with the animals and ensure future success. The more we honor them, the elder explains, the more they give themselves to us. These rock carvings are the earliest art in Egypt, dating back around 19,000 years. Some depict hippos, others cattle. A few even show human figures and boats, though the boats came later as the climate began to change. Predicting the weather, naphtaliya, and astronomy. And speaking of climate change, that is precisely what will transform this green savanna into the Egypt we recognize. Around 10,000 years ago, the Earth's axis tilted slightly, about half a degree. This tiny shift had profound consequences, gradually changing the rainfall patterns across North Africa. The rains come later each year, the old woman observes as your group gathers around the fire, and they bring less water. She's right. Over your lifetime, you have noticed the seasonal lakes shrinking, the grasslands receding. Wild animals are becoming harder to find. Your people have to travel farther for food, competing with other bands for diminishing resources. Fun fact: this climate change was not caused by human activity, like today's version. It was a natural shift that occurred gradually over centuries. But for the people living through it, it was absolutely devastating. Imagine watching your entire environment slowly die around you, without understanding why. Over generations, as the climate continued to dry, these nomadic hunters were forced to adapt. They began to follow the retreating moisture, moving closer to the large lakes that formed during the rainy season. One such area is called Nabta, about 100 kilometers southwest of Abu Simbel in southern Egypt. This is where things get fascinating. At Nabta, these early people began to settle into communities, still reliant on the annual summer rains. But they needed to accurately predict when those rains would return. Their solution: they turned to the night sky. When those stars, a tribal elder points up at a specific constellation, appear directly overhead, the rains will come soon. What archaeologists found at Nabta is mind-blowing. A stone circle dating back about 7,000 years, the earliest evidence of how Egyptian weather predictors became astronomers. They aligned its central stones with circumpolar stars, stars visible in the night sky year-round. When the sun appeared directly overhead, the stones cast no shadow, signaling the imminent arrival of the summer rains. Think about that. Thousands of years before Stonehenge, these people were creating astronomical calendars to track the seasons. and this obsession with aligning monuments to celestial bodies, it would define Egyptian architecture for the next 5,000 years. Every tomb, every temple, every pyramid would be aligned to the stars. The connection they made was simple but profound. If the stars and the rain are linked, then this world and the afterlife must be linked. The physical and spiritual realms were not separate, they were intertwined. The climate continued to dry, and these people increasingly focused on the only reliable source of water, the Nile. Communities began to form along its banks, utilizing its annual flood, which left behind rich, fertile soil, perfect for growing crops. Look how the black soil spreads after the water recedes. An early farmer tells his child, "It is the river's gift." This black soil, Kemet in ancient Egyptian, would give Egypt its name, the Black Land. By about 5000 BCE, these communities were growing wheat and barley, raising cattle and goats, producing a food surplus that would allow civilization to develop. With food production came specialization. Not everyone had to farm or hunt. Some could become artisans, crafting pottery, tools, and eventually luxury goods. Others became religious specialists, responsible for the rituals that ensured the Nile's annual flood. I was reading an old archaeologist's field journal from a 1920s excavation, and he described finding one of the earliest Egyptian potteries. What stuck with me is how he could see the fingerprints pressed into the clay. Actual fingerprints of someone who lived 7,000 years ago. It's like you are literally touching the past. These early settled communities developed distinct cultures in different parts of Egypt. In the north, settlements clustered around the delta. In the south, they concentrated around the bend of the Nile. They would become the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, which developed into two different cultures. What united them was the miracle of the Nile, which turned the desert into a paradise. Its annual flood renewed the fertility of the soil, making it one of the most productive agricultural lands in the ancient world. Egyptian farmers could grow everything from wheat and barley to figs, melons, and vegetables. Other lands need constant work, a farmer says, watching the Nile waters retreat from his fields. Ours gives to us freely. This is not an exaggeration. While farmers in Mesopotamia had to constantly maintain complex irrigation systems, Egyptian agriculture was relatively simple. Plant after the flood recedes, harvest before the next one comes. The land practically farmed itself. But alongside the development of agriculture, these early Egyptians also developed something else, a unique view of death. Unlike their nomadic ancestors who could simply leave their dead behind, settled people needed ways to manage death within their communities. The body returns to the earth, an elder explains, as the community prepares a grave, but the personality continues to exist. This is where we first see the beginnings of what would become Egypt's most mysterious practice, mummification. It started naturally, with bodies being buried in the hot desert sand. They would dehydrate rather than decompose, preserving the skin, hair, and nails. Mummification as necessity, the car soul. The Egyptians noticed this preservation and came to see it as significant. One specific burial from around 3400 BCE shows a body card in the fetal position, hinting at rebirth, surrounded by pottery, jewelry, and other possessions. Everything important in life accompanied the person into death. The message was clear. Death was not an end, but a transition to another state of existence. This is where it gets even stranger. For the Egyptians, preserving the body was crucial because it housed the soul. A mere skeleton was not enough. The person had to be recognizable to host their spirit for eternity. Even dead, we must look like ourselves, a ritual specialist explains. Otherwise, how will our car soul know where to reside? Throughout Egypt's long history, this core belief would spur the development of increasingly complex mummification methods. What began as simple sand burials would eventually become the elaborate process we associate with ancient Egypt. Organ removal, drying the body with natron salt, wrapping in linen bandages, and placing in ornate sarcophagi. As settlements grew into towns and early capitals, another critical development occurred. the emergence of writing. And you know what's funny about the earliest writing in the world? It wasn't developed to express poetry or record history. It was created to count taxes. In the ancient city of Abydos, archaeologists found small bone and ivory tags dating back to around 3250 BCE. Each was engraved with symbols of animals, birds, or plants and was pierced to attach to chests or vessels containing oil, linen, or grain. These symbols represented the regions producing these goods, sent as tax payments to a central authority. Every mark must be clear. An official instructs as scribes prepare the tags. The king must know what comes from each district. These simple symbols gradually evolved into the elegant hieroglyphic script that would record the Egyptian language for the next 3,000 years. So yes, bureaucracy and taxes literally invented writing. As these communities grew in size and complexity, leadership became increasingly important. Local chiefs competed for resources and territory. The inevitable clash between the different cultures of Upper and Lower Egypt is captured on what many consider Egypt's foundational document, an Narmer palette. This ceremonial artifact depicts the moment when King Narmer of Upper Egypt routed his northern enemy, uniting the two lands under a single rule. It shows Narmer in the classic posture of defeat, raising a mace over the head of a kneeling captive. This powerful image would be repeated throughout Egyptian history. Narmer has united the two lands, a herald announces to the gathered crowd. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt now rest upon one head. Narmer became the first king of Egypt around 3100 BCE. Founding the first dynasty and creating what many scholars consider the world's first nation state. Egypt was now a single country with one ruler, a shared culture, and a central government. As the sun sets on this first day of unified Egypt, you find yourself not in a cave or a simple hut, but in a mud brick house in one of the growing settlements along the Nile. The river flows outside, its gentle sounds seeping through the reed mat hanging in your doorway. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also the continued unfolding of what will become one of the most enduring civilizations in history. As you lie on your reed mat, listening to the night sounds of ancient Egypt, it is worth taking a moment to appreciate how far these people have come. From nomadic hunters following herds across a disappearing savanna, to the creators of a unified state that would build the pyramids and temples we still admire. The story was only beginning. The architect god Imhotep and the step pyramid, unlike your comfortable bed with its soft mattress and perfectly fluffed pillows, this early Egyptian sleeping arrangement is simple. A reed mat on a slightly raised platform, perhaps a headrest carved from wood or stone to keep your head off the ground and preserve your hairstyle. But after a long day of farming, fishing, or building, even this simple bed feels welcoming enough. Dawn breaks over a different Egypt. It is now about 2700 BCE, more than 4,700 years ago, and the early nation-state has evolved into something far more complex. You stand on the western bank of the Nile, watching as laborers flock to a massive construction project that will redefine our idea of human achievement forever. A foreman walks by, barking orders. Those limestone blocks need to be on the north side by noon. The king wants progress. This is not the building of the Great Pyramid yet. We are still in the early phases of Egypt's pyramid age. What you are witnessing is the start of the world's first large stone building, the step pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara. Egypt has been unified for about 400 years, ruled by pharaohs who trace their lineage back to Narmer. These kings were buried in large, flat rectangular tombs called mastabas. Basically, brick-covered rectangular boxes. Not bad, but nothing revolutionary. But King Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep are about to change everything. Put another level on top. Imhotep instructs the master builders, pointing to plans drawn on papyrus. Then another, and another. The workers stare at him as if he has gone mad. You want to build a mastaba on top of another mastaba? Yes, Imhotep says confidently. And then 4 more on top of that. This moment, This seemingly simple idea of stacking mastobas of diminishing size on top of each other would create the step pyramid, Egypt's first monumental stone structure and the precursor to all true pyramids. Picture that. No one had ever built anything like this in stone before. It was like going from building log cabins to suddenly erecting the Empire State Building. The engineering problems they had to solve were insane. Saqqara becomes a hive of activity. Thousands of laborers quarry limestone blocks, haul them on wooden sledges, and carefully set them in place. Others mix mortar, form decorative elements, and carve inscriptions. This is not just a tomb being built, it is an entire complex with courtyards, temples, and storehouses. Imhotep's design is not just large, it is revolutionary. Upon completion, the step pyramid would stand over 60 meters, nearly 200 feet tall, with 6 distinct steps or levels. It was the tallest building on Earth at that time. The king's soul must ascend to join the unwearying stars in the north. A priest explains as you watch the construction. This monument creates a stairway for his journey. This is a key point about the Egyptian pyramids. They were not just massive tombs. They were machines for transformation, designed to help the king's soul ascend to the heavens. Logistics and bureaucracy. The tomb builders are unknown. You follow the workers to the dining area where they receive their rations. The Egyptian state feeds these workers well. Archaeological evidence shows they received plenty of bread, beer, fish, and even meat. These were not slaves building the pyramids. They were skilled laborers, artisans, and seasonal farmers working during the annual Nile flood when their fields were underwater. How many days do you work here? You ask a stonecutter, sharing a jar of beer with him. 3 months this season, he tells you, taking a bite of bread. I'll stay until the flood recedes. The pay is good. Enough grain to feed my family for a year, plus the honor of building for the king. This is what modern people misunderstand about ancient Egypt. Building these monuments was not just forced labor. It was part of their religious and social duty. The pharaoh maintained the cosmic order, called Mot, and ensured the proper Nile flood that brought fertility to the land. In return, the people contributed their labor to his monuments. This was the divine pact that made Egypt function. Walking through the construction site, you spot someone important. A man is giving detailed instructions to the laborers, checking plans, and inspecting the quality of the stonework. It is Imhotep himself, the genius behind the step pyramid. Imhotep was not born to royalty or wealth. Historians believe he came from a common background, but rose through the ranks. Due to his brilliant mind, he was an architect, physician, astronomer, and eventually, a high priest. Talk about climbing the corporate ladder. The man went from commoner to virtually deified. See how these blocks must fit exactly, he tells a group of stonecutters, running his hand over a joint. The king's eternal house must be perfect. Imhotep was so revered that after death, he achieved something almost unheard of for a non-royal person. He was worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom. The Greeks later equated him with their god of medicine, Asclepius. Not bad for an architect. Let's fast forward about 75 years. The step pyramid was only the beginning. We are now at Giza, circa 2550 BCE, watching the construction of the Great Pyramid of King Khufu. The largest pyramid ever built, and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Workers are setting 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. The finished pyramid would stand 146 meters 481 feet tall, with a base covering 13 acres. For comparison, you could fit St. Peter's Basilica in Rome inside this thing and still have room left over. How do they move those massive blocks? You whisper to an overseer. With great effort, he laughs. We quarry the stone, then drag it on wooden sleds. For the largest blocks, we need hundreds of men pulling together. Recent archaeological evidence suggests they also used clever tricks, such as wetting the sand in front of the sleds to reduce friction. Ancient Egyptians may not have had advanced technology, but they were masters at applying basic physics principles to solve enormous engineering challenges. Behind a massive wall known as the Wall of the Crow is an entire city of workers. About 20,000 people worked on the Great Pyramid, not all at once, but in shifting cycles throughout the year. Most were farmers who worked during the annual Nile flood. Others were permanent skilled artisans. Let's see where they lived. You walk into a section of barracks-long, narrow buildings with sleeping platforms for the workers. By modern standards, it's crowded. About 20 men share a room. The overseers sleep at each end, a worker explains, pointing to the slightly raised platforms. The rest sleep between, head to toe. The workers' diet was surprisingly good. Archaeologists have found evidence that they ate beef, mutton, goat, fish, and plenty of bread and beer. The state provided this food as payment, understanding that well-fed workers were productive workers. In the main workers' village at Giza, there is a dedicated food preparation area. Massive bakers bake bread, breweries make beer, and butchers carve meat. The logistics of feeding thousands of laborers daily was a colossal operation in itself. 20 loaves per man, a supply chief calculates, making notes on a sheet of papyrus, plus 2 jars of beer, onions, garlic, and a serving of fish or meat. When the Egyptian state was strong, this system worked surprisingly well. Labor was organized by a complex bureaucracy that kept detailed records of workers, supplies, and progress. Speaking of bureaucracy, it's another Egyptian invention we still deal with. They had officials for everything. Overseers of granaries, scribes of royal documents, masters of royal works. Every aspect of society was catalogued, recorded, and managed. Let's step into one of the scribe offices near the construction site. A group of men sit cross-legged, writing on papyrus scrolls with reed pens. These are the accountants of ancient Egypt, tracking supplies, labor, and expenditure. 20 limestone blocks from Tour arrive today. An overseer dictates, as a scribe meticulously records the information. 45 laborers are present in the eastern quadrant. 3 are absent due to illness. Being a scribe was one of the best professions in ancient Egypt. You avoided heavy physical labor, earned well, and had social status. Egyptian parents encouraged their sons to train as scribes. There are actual ancient Egyptian school texts where fathers lecture their sons on the advantages of a scribe's education over other professions. The cult of death and bureaucracy. The Egyptians noticed this preservation of bodies in the sand and began to see it as significant. One particular burial from around 3400 BCE shows a body curled in a fetal position, hinting at rebirth, surrounded by pottery, jewelry, and other possessions. The message was clear. Death was not an end, but a transition to another state of existence. This is where it gets even stranger. For the Egyptians, the preservation of the body was crucial because it housed the soul. The person had to be recognizable to host their spirit for eternity. Even dead, we must look like ourselves, a ritual specialist explains. Otherwise, how will our core soul know where to dwell? Throughout Egypt's long history, this core belief would spur the development of increasingly complex mummification techniques. What started as simple burials in the sand would eventually become the elaborate process we associate with ancient Egypt. As settlements grew into towns, another critical development occurred: the appearance of writing. And you know what is funny about the earliest writing in the world? It was created to count taxes. In the ancient city of Abydos, archaeologists found small bone and ivory tags dating back to about 3250 BCE. These symbols gradually evolved into the elegant hieroglyphic script that would record the Egyptian language for the next 3,000 years. As these communities grew in size and complexity, leadership became increasingly important. The clash between the distinct cultures of Upper and Lower Egypt is captured on the Narmer palette. This ceremonial artifact depicts the moment when King Narmer of Upper Egypt routed his northern enemy, uniting the two lands under a single rule. Narmer has united the two lands, a herald announces to the gathered crowd. Narmer became the first king of Egypt around 3100 BCE, establishing the first dynasty and creating what many scholars consider the world's first nation-state. When the sun sets on this first day of unified Egypt, you find yourself in a mud brick house in one of the growing settlements along the Nile. The river flows outside, its gentle sounds seeping through the reed mat. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also the continuing unfolding of what will become one of the longest-lasting civilizations in history. The golden age of the pyramids Khufu and Khafre. It is now about 2700 BCE. You are standing on the west bank of the Nile, watching workers stream toward the construction of the step pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara, the world's first major stone building. Architect Imhotep decided to stack mastabas of diminishing size on top of each other, creating a stairway for the ascension of the king's soul. Let's fast forward about 75 years. We are now at Giza circa 2550 BCE, watching the construction of the Great Pyramid of King Khufu. Workers are setting to 0.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons. They use wooden sleds and wet the sand to reduce friction. Behind the wall of the Crow is an entire city of workers. About 20,000 people worked on the pyramid. These were not slaves, but skilled workers and seasonal farmers working during the Nile flood. The pay is good. Enough grain to feed my family for a year, plus the honor of building for the king, says one stonecutter. This was a divine pact. The pharaoh maintained the cosmic order mat, and the people contributed to his monuments. While the pyramids were being built, most Egyptians lived in much simpler mud brick homes. Life centered around a central courtyard. Furniture was minimal. Reed mats, wooden stools, headrests. Hygiene was surprisingly high. Natron was used as soap, reed brushes for cleaning teeth, and mint for fresh breath. Agriculture followed the predictable cycle of the Nile with 3 seasons: Akhet inundation, Pert growing season, and Shamu harvest. This natural rhythm gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. But by the 5th dynasty, something was changing. The pyramids built by later kings were smaller. The massive building projects had strained Egypt's resources. Climate change began to affect the reliability of the Nile flood. Political power was becoming increasingly decentralized. At Abusir, around 2400 BCE, King Unis built his pyramid complex. The walls of his burial chamber are carved with hundreds of hieroglyphic inscriptions, known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt. These spells will protect the king in the afterlife, a priest explains. They will help him ascend to the sky with Ra. But on Unis's causeway, connecting his pyramid to the valley temple, there is a disturbing image. Emaciated figures representing famine victims. This rare moment of realism hints at problems. They suffer when the rains cease, an artist explains. But such woes will never reach the Black Land. He's wrong. By 2200 BCE, Egypt would face a series of low Nile floods, leading to famine, political instability, and the collapse of central authority. The end of the Old Kingdom would plunge Egypt into its first Dark Age, a period of fragmentation, called the First Intermediate Period. The collapse of power. The First Intermediate Period, the Nile no longer floods properly. For 5 years now, the waters have barely risen, leaving the fields parched and the granaries dangerously empty. It is now around 2180 BCE. The Old Kingdom has collapsed. How can the king fail to bring the flood? Asks a farmer, looking at his withered crops. Has he lost the favor of the gods? This is Egypt's first major crisis. The First Intermediate Period, a perfect storm of disasters. Climate change brings numerous low Nile floods, famine spreads across the countryside, and a weakened monarchy is unable to respond effectively. Pharaoh Pepi, the last significant king of the Old Kingdom, allegedly ruled for 94 years, but ended his incredibly long reign as an ineffective old man. The system simply cannot function properly with such a vacuum of leadership. The collapse of central authority creates a vacuum that is quickly filled by the nomarchs, regional governors. These local rulers stop sending taxes to the capital. instead withholding resources to care for their own territories. Egypt effectively breaks up into regional kingdoms again, as it was before Narmer's unification. Let's visit one of these regional power centers at Moala, in Upper Egypt. An Amarch named Ankh-Tefi has declared himself the de facto ruler of his territory. His tomb is carved with an autobiography that tells us what life was like in this chaotic time. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. Ankh-Tefi's inscription boasts, I never allowed anyone to starve in this province. Reading between the lines, we see a man exploiting a power vacuum. He describes military campaigns against neighboring provinces, claiming to be restoring order, but actually just expanding his territory. He barely mentions the king. I am the beginning and the end of humanity, Ankh-Tefi's inscription declares, since none like me existed before, and none shall exist. His self-praise reveals something crucial. Local strongmen were now the real power in Egypt. The divine pharaoh was becoming increasingly irrelevant. The real suffering, however, falls on the common Egyptians. Ankh-Tefi's tomb contains a chilling description. The whole of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to the extent that everyone came to the point of eating his children. While this is likely exaggerated for dramatic effect, archaeological evidence does show signs of widespread malnutrition during this period. Without the coordinated action of a strong central government, local areas were left to fend for themselves when the Nile failed to flood properly. Now, around 2050 BCE, we are in Thebes' modern Luxor. This southern city, formerly a backwater, becomes the center of the movement to reunite Egypt. A family of local rulers, the Mentuhoteps, a name meaning that the war god Montu is satisfied, build up military strength and expand north. The south will rise again. A soldier jokes as troops muster for a northern campaign. Thebes will rule all of Egypt. He's right. After decades of fighting, Mentuhotep I defeats the northern rulers and reunifies Egypt in approximately 2055 BCE, establishing what we now call the Middle Kingdom. This is where it gets really brutal. When archaeologists excavated Mentuhotep's temple complex at Deir el-Bahari, they discovered a mass grave containing about 60 soldiers. These were not carefully mummified nobles. These were real guys who fought and died in the civil war to reunite Egypt. Look here, an archaeologist says, pointing to a skeleton, a penetrating arrow wound to the chest, and this one massive trauma to the head, likely from a mace. The bodies of these soldiers tell a violent story of reunification. Some had healed fractures from previous battles before being killed in the final fight. Others had signs of being finished off when helpless on the battlefield. All were collected and buried with honors in what may be the world's first known military cemetery. But the true horror of the civil war in Egypt occurred at Abydos, Egypt's most sacred site. It was the burial place of the earliest kings of Egypt. During the civil war, northern troops committed the unthinkable. They desecrated these royal tombs, burning them and destroying the royal mummies inside. A heinous deed, as later texts called it, destroyed Egypt's physical link to its royal ancestors. The sacred bodies of the kings, intended for preservation for eternity, were annihilated. This was an act of cultural desecration that is almost impossible for a modern person to fully grasp. Imagine someone burning Arlington National Cemetery while simultaneously destroying the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Spiritual restoration, the Middle Kingdom, the reunification of Egypt by Mentuhotep I was thus not just a political victory, but a spiritual restoration. He portrayed himself as the heir to the Old Kingdom, building a temple complex that combined elements of the pyramid and the temple. He wore both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the reunion of the two lands. I have healed the division, Mentuhotep declares in an inscription. The two lands are unified under my rule, as they were under the kings of old. The Middle Kingdom c. 2050-165 OBC is considered by many scholars to be Egypt's golden age, not an era of massive monuments like the Old Kingdom, but an era of art, literature, and a more humanistic culture. The trauma of the first intermediate period profoundly changed Egyptian society. Let's visit the new capital Utch-Toy, near the entrance to the Fayum region. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom moved the administrative center away from Memphis to this new site, symbolizing a new beginning. In the scribal schools attached to the royal court, something remarkable is happening. A new form of literature emerges. Stories, teachings, and even what we might call novels. The most famous is the tale of Sinew, about an Egyptian official who flees to Asia after the king's assassination, lives among foreigners, and eventually returns home to Egypt. Read that again, a young scribe asks his teacher. The part where Sinew fights the champion of Rechenim. The teacher unrolls the papyrus scroll and reads dramatically. Then he came at me while I waited. I shot, my arrow lodging in his neck. He cried out. He fell on his nose. I slew him with his own battle axe. This is entertainment, not just religious or royal propaganda. Egyptians are developing a rich literary tradition that includes adventure stories, wisdom texts, and even love poetry. Unlike the formal, idealized art and writing of the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom literature often deals with uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and real human emotions. Another important text from this period is the dialogue of a man with his bowl, essentially a man arguing with his soul about whether life is worth living. This is perhaps the world's first recorded exploration of existential despair. The Egyptian who wrote this would have understood Hamlet's to be, or not to be perfectly well. Why do I remain alive? The man asks his soul. Death is before me today like the recovery of a sick man, like going forth after confinement. His soul replies, if you think of burial, that is heartache. It brings tears, making a man unhappy. Don't think about it. This psychological depth reflects a culture recovering from the trauma of civil war and social collapse. The old certainties were gone. The king was no longer an untouchable god, and the promise of eternal order had been broken. The democratization of the afterlife, the Middle Kingdom's response, was to create a more accessible version of Egyptian culture. Royal portraits became more humanistic. Kings were depicted with lines of worry and expressions that suggested the burden of rule. The king sleeps little, thinking of his people, a court official explains. Common people could now access the magic of the afterlife, which had previously been reserved for the royal family. Non-royal coffins were inscribed with protective spells, adapted from the royal pyramid texts. Even an artisan like me can now have an afterlife, a carpenter says, putting aside money to purchase his own inscribed coffin. The gods will know my name. This democratization of the afterlife is one of the most important developments in Egyptian religious history. By the Middle Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could purchase funerary equipment with protective spells and imagery, essentially accessing the same afterlife previously reserved for kings. The economic base for this cultural flourishing comes from massive infrastructure projects, initiated by Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Let's visit one. A huge irrigation project in the Fayum region, where canals and dams are being built to control the flow of the Nile into this natural depression. When the system is complete, it will water thousands of acres. A foreman explains while workers dig the channels. Even in years of low inundation, we will have a water reserve here. Senusriti, one of the most powerful kings of the 12th dynasty, exemplifies the new Middle Kingdom ruler. His statues depict him with a pensive, almost frowning expression, a stark contrast to the serene, idealized faces of Old Kingdom kings. The message is clear. Rule is hard work, not a divine game. Senusriti was also a military genius who led campaigns into Nubia, modern Sudan, to secure Egypt's southern border and control the gold mines there, rather than relying on the traditional Egyptian approach of periodic raids. He established a permanent military presence by building a series of massive fortresses along the Nile. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were engineering marvels, massive mud brick structures with walls up to 11 meters 36 feet high and moats that would be the envy of medieval castle builders. The largest, Buin, had an outer wall over a mile long, They functioned as military bases, administrative centers, and trading posts all rolled into one. These walls tell the Nubians, Egypt is here to stay. A garrison commander tells you as you walk the crenellated walls. No one passes north or south without our permission. Control of these fortresses meant control of the trade. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal hides flowed north from inner Africa, while Egyptian manufactured goods flowed south. Egypt's influence was not limited to the south. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt established trade connections across the Mediterranean and the Near East. At the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon, Egyptian merchants had a permanent presence, trading for the cedar wood the Egyptians valued for shipbuilding and luxury items. The mountains of Lebanon grow the finest cedars, an Egyptian merchant says, as a ship is unloaded in an Egyptian harbor. A single tree can provide a mast high enough to hold a sail that moves a ship of 60 men, and tons of cargo. Egyptian ships were technological marvels, capable of navigating both the Nile and the Mediterranean Sea. One of the most famous Middle Kingdom achievements was the trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, likely somewhere along the Red Sea coast of Africa. This is recorded in detailed relief carvings showing the exotic goods brought back to Egypt. From Punt, we brought back incense tree saplings, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The expedition leader boasts even baboons and a giraffe for the king's menagerie. The Middle Kingdom also saw significant advancements in everyday technology. Water clocks, improved potter's wheels, bronze working, as well as advances in mathematics and medicine occurred during this period. Egyptian doctors were renowned throughout the ancient world for specialized knowledge in anatomy, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. One found an old medical papyrus transcription, where an Egyptian doctor describes treating a head wound. He examines it and says, if you examine a man with a wound in his head which penetrates to the bone, you should feel his wound. If you find a swelling projecting outside that wound, you should say concerning him, an ailment which I will treat. But if the skull is truly split, exposing the brain, the diagnosis changes, an ailment which should not be treated. Which, honestly, is quite fair for Bronze Age medicine. Despite these achievements, the Middle Kingdom carried the seeds of its own decline. Senusrati and his successor, Amenemhat centralized power, reducing the authority of the nomarchs. But this meant the system became increasingly dependent on a strong king. When Amenemhat died after a brief reign, he was succeeded by a female pharaoh, his sister Nefersobik. While she was a legitimate ruler, her short reign around 4 years ended without a clear successor. Concluding the 12th dynasty, the 13th dynasty that followed maintained the appearance of the Middle Kingdom, but with significantly less stability. In less than a century, over 60 kings ruled in rapid succession, few lasting longer than a year or two. Central control waned, and Egypt began to fragment again. The Hyksos' second intermediate period. During this unstable period, new groups infiltrated the Nile Delta from the Near East, known to the Egyptians as the Ormu or Asiatics. They gradually established themselves as rulers in the eastern delta city of Avaris. By approximately 1650 BCE, these foreign rulers, whom historians call the Hyksos, gained control of northern Egypt, while a native Egyptian dynasty continued to rule the south from Thebes. Egypt was divided once again, entering the second intermediate period. But this division was different from the first. Now, foreigners controlled a significant portion of Egypt, challenging not only political unity, but also cultural identity. They worship strange gods, a Theban priest complains. They use curved swords instead of proper Egyptian weapons. They speak our language with odd accents. How can such people claim to be kings of Egypt? The reality, however, was more complex. Archaeological evidence shows that the Hyksos quickly adopted Egyptian culture, writing, and royal titles. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and were not merely foreign invaders. They represented the complex cultural blending that occurs with migration and integration. As the sun sets on the Middle Kingdom, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The confident, isolated civilization of the Old Kingdom is gone forever. The more cosmopolitan, internationally connected Middle Kingdom is fading. Ahead is a period of foreign influence, followed by a new type of Egyptian empire, one that will project its power far beyond the Nile Valley. In your modern bed with machine-made sheets and a memory foam pillow, you can sleep securely knowing that food will be available tomorrow, regardless of weather or politics. But as you drift off to sleep in ancient Egypt at the close of the Middle Kingdom, that certainty is fading. The Nile may or may not flood properly. The gods may or may not be pleased, and foreigners with strange weapons and customs are infiltrating the land of the pharaohs, carrying both threat and opportunity for the world's most ancient civilization. Dawn breaks over a divided Egypt. In the north, foreign rulers called the Hyksos control the delta from their capital, Avaris. In the south, native Egyptian kings still rule from Thebes. It is now the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1600 BCE, and the tension between these two realms is reaching a critical point. The Hyksos are not what you might expect. Instead of savage barbarians, they are sophisticated rulers who have largely adopted Egyptian culture. They write in hieroglyphs, worship Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and use Egyptian titles. Their kings took Egyptian throne names. The current ruler calls himself King Apophis. They wear our clothes, they use our writing, but they will never truly understand Mat. A Theban official sneers, that concept of cosmic order, balance, and justice that is the foundation of Egyptian civilization. Only a true Egyptian king can uphold it. What makes the Hyksos truly threatening is not just their control of northern Egypt, but their military innovations. They introduced new weapons and tactics that gave them an edge. The composite bow, more effective axes, and most importantly, the horse and chariot. Let's visit a Hyksos military camp outside Avaris. Soldiers are practicing with these strange new weapons, especially the chariot, a light, fast, two-wheeled cart pulled by horses. The military revolution, chariots, and the expulsion of the Hyksos. Egypt had never seen anything like it. The chariot is a mobile fighting platform. A Hyksos officer explains to new recruits. One man drives, the other shoots. We can strike and be gone, before the Egyptian infantry can reach us. This military technology was revolutionary. Previously, Egyptian battles were largely infantry affairs. Masses of men with shields, spears, and maces fighting fiercely against each other. The chariot changed everything, allowing archers to deploy, shoot, and reposition rapidly. It was the ancient equivalent of introducing tanks onto a field of foot soldiers. The standoff between Thebes and the Hyksos deteriorated when King Apophis sent a message to the Theban ruler, Seqenenre. The exact content is lost, but it apparently contained an insult so egregious that it provoked a military response. The message supposedly complained about the hippopotamuses in the Theban pool making noise and keeping Apophis from sleeping in his capital hundreds of miles away. It was a deliberate provocation, a court official whispers. Whatever the message contained, the conflict escalated. Seqenenre led troops north against the Hyksos but was killed in battle. His mummy, discovered by archaeologists in the 1880s, shows the horrific injuries that killed him. 5 separate blows, the royal physician says quietly, examining the king's body as he is prepared for mummification. He met his enemies directly. The fight continued under Seqenenre's son, Kamose, who advanced further north, and then his brother, Ahmose, who finally succeeded around 1550 BCE. Ahmose besieged Avaris, captured it, and pursued the fleeing Hyksos to their fortress at Sharon in southern Canaan, which he besieged for 3 years before capturing. The victory over the Hyksos marked the beginning of Egypt's new kingdom 1550-1069 BC, arguably the peak of ancient Egyptian civilization. But something had fundamentally changed. The experience of foreign occupation and the struggle to drive out the invaders turned Egypt from an isolated kingdom into an aggressive empire. Never again will foreigners rule the Black Land, Ahmose declares to his troops, "From now on, we will strike them in their own territories before they can threaten Egypt." This new imperial mentality, combined with the military technology adopted from the Hyksos, especially the chariot, turned Egypt into an ancient world superpower. Under the kings of the 18th dynasty, Egyptian armies would push far beyond their traditional borders, creating an empire that stretched from Sudan to Syria. Let's jump ahead a few decades, to the reign of Thutmose I, around 1450 BCE. He led the Egyptian army north into Canaan, where he confronted a coalition of local princes, backed by the powerful kingdom of Mitanni, at the Battle of Megiddo. This is arguably the first major battle in history that we can reconstruct in detail. The enemy has taken position by Megiddo. A scout reports to Thutmose, "They believe we must take the wide, safe road around the mountain, but there is a narrow track that leads directly to them." Thutmose makes a daring decision, leading his army through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass his generals advised against. The gamble pays off. He surprises and routs the coalition forces, forcing them to retreat into the walled city of Megiddo, which he then besieges for 7 months. Had we taken the easy way, as the enemy expected, the battle would have been much harder. Thutmose tells his officers later, "Sometimes the most dangerous route offers the greatest opportunity." Thutmose would eventually lead at least 17 military campaigns into the Near East, establishing Egypt's first true empire. He was so successful that he is sometimes called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Under his rule, wealth flooded into Egypt: gold, silver, precious woods, horses, and exotic goods from across the known world. The woman pharaoh and the temples of Karnak. But before Thutmose ruled alone, there was one of the most remarkable chapters in Egyptian history: the reign of Hatshepsut, his stepmother and aunt, who ruled as a female pharaoh for about 22 years. Officially, Hatshepsut started as regent for the young Thutmose, who was only about 2 years old when his father died. But after a few years, she took the unprecedented step of declaring herself king. Not queen, but king, complete with all the titles and regalia of a male pharaoh. Let's visit her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, where massive relief sculptures show Hatshepsut performing all the traditional duties of kingship. In these images, she is often depicted with a male body, wearing the traditional false beard of the pharaohs. Though other depictions show her in female form, the king must be shown performing the sacred rituals, explains a priest at the temple. Hatshepsut does everything a king must do to uphold Mot. One of Hatshepsut's greatest accomplishments was the trade expedition to the land of Punt. Recorded in detail on her temple walls, the carvings show Egyptian ships sailing to this exotic location, probably somewhere in East Africa, where they traded for frankincense saplings, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The Punt expedition shows that our strength extends beyond military conquest. A court official says proudly, "Nations willingly trade with Egypt because of our wealth and prestige." After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose finally ruled alone, although he eventually ordered most mentions of Hatshepsut to be erased from monuments, likely to solidify his son's claim to the throne rather than out of personal animosity. He built upon her diplomatic and economic foundations, adding his own military conquests. By the height of the New Kingdom circa 14,001,300 BCE, Egypt was unimaginably wealthy. Let's visit Thebes, now the religious capital. During a festival, the city is booming. Temples are expanding. Trade goods from across the known world fill the markets, and building projects are everywhere. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to the god Ammon, had become the largest religious complex in the world. Walking through its massive hypostyle halls, you feel dwarfed by the 24-meter, 80-foot tall columns. This is not merely a temple, a priest tells you proudly. It is a statement of Egypt's power and prosperity. The temple owns lands throughout Egypt, hundreds of villages, thousands of cattle, countless fields. Our granaries are always full. The cult of Ammon had become incredibly powerful, Originally a minor, local deity associated with Thebes, Amun rose to become Egypt's state god. Identified with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra, his priesthood controls immense wealth and wields significant political influence. Let's move from the temple to the palace of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, who ruled around 1350 BCE, at the absolute peak of Egypt's prosperity and international prestige. His palace at Mor-Kotta on the west bank of Thebes is a sprawling complex of audience halls, living quarters, artificial lakes, and gardens. Diplomatic envoys from Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria, and Hatti are all waiting to meet the king, explains the royal steward. They bring tribute and beg for Egyptian gold. Egypt under Amenhotep I was so rich that he could literally give away gold to foreign rulers. In diplomatic letters found by archaeologists, the famous Amarna letters, foreign kings repeatedly plead with Amenhotep for more gold, complaining that what he sent previously was not enough. A testament to Egypt's incredible resources. Gold is more common in Egypt than dust, Amenhotep is reported to have told one ambassador. This wasn't just royal propaganda. Egypt controlled the major gold mining regions of Nubia and the eastern deserts. A single mine could produce over a ton of gold per year, an astronomical sum in the ancient world. Life of the artisans Deir el-Medina, but common Egyptians were also prospering. Let's visit the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the skilled workmen who carved and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Unlike the anonymous masses who built the pyramids, we know these people by name and their personal lives, thanks to the thousands of written records they left behind. 8 loaves of bread, 4 jars of beer, and half a sack of dates. A workman lists to his wife upon returning home, tallying his day's pay, plus that piece of linen the foreman gave me for repairing his door. These workers were well-paid specialists, the elite craftsmen of their time. They received official rations, but also earned extra income through side jobs. Their homes were small but comfortable, with several rooms, some basic furniture, and even artwork on the walls. The most remarkable thing about Deir el-Medina is how much it tells us about ordinary life. In New Kingdom Egypt, the workers left behind everything from official records to personal letters, medical prescriptions, love poems, and even gossip. One ostracon, a pottery shard used as a writing surface, records a workman complaining that his neighbor's donkey ate his vegetables. Another contains a love poem from a young man to his sweetheart. Your love has gone through my body, like honey mixed with water. The poem reads, my heart pounds when I think of you. The daily lives of these workers followed a predictable pattern. They worked 8 days, then took 2 days off the earliest known weekend. They received regular supplies of food, water, and provisions from the state. When they weren't working on the royal tombs, they were creating their own tombs, building furniture, and performing various specialized crafts. Not everything was harmony, however. Records from Deir el-Medina document the first recorded workers' strike in history. When grain supplies were delayed, the workers simply sat down at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings. We are hungry, their leader announced to the officials. We have no grain, no oil, no fish, no vegetables. Tell the pharaoh, we cannot cut his tomb if we are starving. The officials scrambled to fix the problem, eventually providing the missing rations. This was not a modern-style labor movement, but it shows that even in ancient autocracies, workers could assert themselves when pushed to the limit. The tombs these workers created in the Valley of the Kings were masterpieces of art and engineering. Unlike the pyramids, which advertised the king's burial place to all, these tombs were cut deep into the limestone cliffs, hidden from view and potential robbers. Their walls were covered with religious texts and images to guide the king through the afterlife. Every scene must be perfect. The master instructs his apprentice as they paint a tomb wall. The king's eternal life depends on it. The New Kingdom saw a change in burial customs for the royal family. While the kings were still mummified with elaborate rituals, their bodies were now placed in a series of nested coffins, often made of solid gold or gold-covered wood, rather than massive stone sarcophagi. The famous gold mask of Tutankhamun gives us a glimpse of the splendor of royal funerary equipment. During this period, for ordinary Egyptians in the New Kingdom, life was generally better than in earlier periods. The empire brought wealth that filtered down through society. Diets improved with a greater variety of foods, including imports. Cosmetics, jewelry, and luxury items became more widely available. Even common homes often had decorative elements and some basic furniture. Medical care also advanced. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus from this period shows that Egyptian doctors had sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and the treatment of injuries. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and even perform simple surgeries. They had an extensive pharmacopoeia of herbal medicines, though these were often mixed with magical spells. For the wound, apply fresh meat on the first day. A physician instructs his apprentice, then bind it with grease, honey, and vegetable fiber. Recite the healing spell twice daily. Education expanded during the New Kingdom, with more people learning to read and write than in previous eras. Akhenaten, the revolution against Ammon. Literacy was still confined mostly to the boys of privileged families, but it was no longer reserved only for specialized scribes. Military officers, priests, administrators, and merchants often had basic literacy. Clothing and fashion also evolved. While basic garments remained simple linen kilts for men and straight sheath dresses for women, styles became more elaborate for the wealthy. Pleated, draped, and layered garments appeared. Wigs became more intricate, and jewelry more complex. The latest style from the capital, a hairdresser says to a wealthy client, showing her an intricate creation. All the court ladies are wearing them like this now. This growing sophistication reflected Egypt's increasing international connections. The New Kingdom was far more cosmopolitan than earlier periods. Foreign diplomats, merchants, and captives brought new ideas, technologies, and customs. Egyptian art shows the influence of Minoan Crete, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. The royal court was becoming increasingly international. As the sun sets on the Egypt of Amenhotep I, the empire is at its absolute peak. Rich, powerful, prestigious. No one could imagine that within one generation, his son, Akhenaten, would overturn Egyptian religion in a radical experiment that would jeopardize centuries of tradition, or that a century later, Egypt would face a new threat from the sea that would begin its long, slow decline. Lying in your comfortable modern bed, you have the luxury of historical perspective. You know that even the most powerful civilizations eventually fade. But for an Egyptian living during the glory days of Amenhotep I, the divine order established at creation seemed as permanent as the stars. What could possibly go wrong? The royal palace in Thebes is in chaos. Amenhotep IV, the son of the great Amenhotep I, has just made an announcement that has stunned the court. He is changing his name to Akhenaten, declaring the Aten, the physical disk of the sun, to be the supreme deity, renouncing the traditional gods, and moving the capital from Thebes to a new city he will build in the middle of the desert. Has the king gone mad? Whispers an Ammon priest, looking around nervously to see if anyone is listening. We are witnessing one of the first recorded religious revolutions in history. Around 1350 BCE, Akhenaten appended over 1,500 years of Egyptian religious tradition, elevating a minor aspect of the sun god to supreme deity, while suppressing the worship of other gods, especially Ammon. Aten alone gives life. Akhenaten declares to his court, all other gods are false. Only through Aten, and through me, his son, can the truth be known. This was not just a theological shift, it was a direct assault on the powerful priesthood of Ammon, which had grown so wealthy and influential that it threatened the king's authority. By closing their temples and redirecting their income to his new religion, Akhenaten was performing nothing less than a palace coup against the religious establishment. Within a few years, Akhenaten moved his court to a new city called Akhetaten, Horizon of Aten, modern-day Tel el-Amarna, built on a previously uninhabited stretch of desert roughly halfway between Thebes and Memphis. Let's visit this strange new capital as it is being built. Everywhere you look, Laborers are dragging stone, making mud bricks, and erecting buildings. The city is being constructed at astonishing speed, with thousands of workers toiling around the clock. The central area contains huge, open-air temples dedicated to the Aten. Unlike traditional Egyptian temples, they have no roofs or inner sanctuaries, allowing the sun's rays to shine directly on the places of worship. No dark rooms, no hidden secrets, explains a royal architect. The light of Aten must reach everything. The most striking thing about Akhenaten is how different it is from traditional Egyptian cities. The artistic style changed dramatically. Depictions of the king and his family show them with elongated heads, drooping features, and exaggerated physical characteristics. A complete break from the idealized, athletic depictions of previous pharaohs. The king says we must show things as they really are, explains an artist, carving a relief depicting the royal family. No more perfect bodies, no symbolic poses. Only the truth matters now. Some scholars believe these strange depictions may suggest Akhenaten suffered from a genetic condition. Others believe it was a purely stylistic choice to break with artistic tradition. Whatever the reason, the Amarna style art is one of the most distinctive and bizarre in ancient Egypt. The most shocking scenes are the intimate scenes of the royal family. Akhenaten is shown kissing his wife, bouncing his daughters on his knee, and relaxing with his family under the rays of the Aten. Nothing like this existed in previous royal Egyptian art, where pharaohs were depicted smiting enemies or standing solemnly before the gods, not showing affection to their families. The king says his love for his family reflects Aten's love for creation, a court official explains. Though he looks uneasy about this radical new imagery, the queen at the center of these family scenes is the famous Nefertiti, whose limestone bust in Berlin is one of the most recognizable images of ancient Egypt. As Akhenaten's chief wife, she plays an unprecedented role in the new religion. Almost as the king's equal partner, the queen makes offerings alongside the pharaoh, and Aten priest says proudly, "She is named the beautiful one has come, and through her beauty, the glory of the Aten is revealed." The collapse of Amarna, Tutankhamun and the restoration. But not everyone is happy with the religious revolution. In Thebes and other traditional religious centers, the closed temples of Amun stand empty, their priests laid off, their income redirected to the cult of the Aten. Common people, whose families had worshipped the traditional gods for countless generations, continue their practices in secret. "My grandfather was a priest of Tur," whispers a craftsman. "He taught me the old prayers. At night, we still recite them with a statuette hidden under our house floor." For all its radical theological approach, daily life in Akhenaten follows familiar Egyptian patterns. The king and his nobles live in lavish palaces and villas, while ordinary workers inhabit simple mud brick homes. Markets still operate, craftsmen still practice their trade, and the bureaucracy still keeps meticulous records. Recent archaeological work at Amarna has uncovered the city's cemeteries, revealing a grim reality behind the beautiful art and high theological ideas. Skeletal remains show evidence of malnutrition, heavy physical labor, and numerous injuries. The city was built so quickly that the workers paid a high physical price. "My back is never without pain," a workman confesses as he drags stone blocks. "We work from sunrise to sunset with little break." The king says we are blessed by Aten, but my blessings feel like curses. Akhenaten's religious revolution lasted less than 2 decades. When he died around 1336 BCE, the experiment quickly unraveled. His immediate successor was Nefertiti, followed by a shadowy figure named Smenkhkare. Then came Akhenaten's young son, originally named Tutankhamun, who would soon change his name to Tutankhamun and restore the traditional gods. Let's visit Thebes during this period of restoration. The temples of Amun are reopening. Priests who were forced into other professions are returning to their duties. Statues of the traditional gods, hidden during Akhenaten's reign, are returned to their sanctuaries. The divine order is restored. An elderly priest declares with tears in his eyes, "Watching the statue of Amun being carried back into Karnak temple. The years of heresy are over. The young king Tutankhamun, who was about 10 when he ascended the throne, is guided by powerful advisors, notably an official named A and the general Horemheb. They engineer a return to orthodoxy, carefully dismantling Akhenaten's religious changes while maintaining royal authority. The king has seen the truth and returned to the gods of his ancestors, A announces to the crowd at Karnak. Amun welcomes his son home. Tutankhamun's reign was brief. He died at around age 19, possibly from complications following a broken leg. His small tomb in the Valley of the Kings was largely missed by robbers, which is why his burial treasures survived intact until Howard Carter discovered them in 1922. The young king, who was a minor figure in Egyptian history, became its most famous pharaoh because of this archaeological accident. After Tutankhamun's death, his advisor E briefly took the throne, followed by General Horemheb. Having no sons, Horemheb appointed his own vizier, Paramesu, as his successor. This man, who took the throne named Ramses I, founded the 19th dynasty around 1292 BCE. His son, Seti I, and grandson, Ramesses II, would restore Egypt's glory after the upheaval of the Amarna period. Let's visit Egypt during the early reign of Ramesses II, circa 1279 BCE, who would become known to history as Ramesses the Great. The royal court has moved back to Pyramesses in the Delta. It is a huge, impressive city with multiple palace complexes, military barracks, and temples. Ramesses is particularly focused on military glory, aiming to restore Egypt's empire after its neglect during the Amarna period. The king trains with his chariot every morning, an officer tells you, as you watch Ramesses practice archery while driving his chariot at full speed. He can hit a target no bigger than your fist, while the horses are at a full gallop. It may be an exaggeration, but Ramesses cultivated the image of the mighty warrior king. In the 5th year of his reign, he led the Egyptian army north against the rising power of the Hittite Empire. The climax was the Battle of Kadesh in modern Syria, likely the largest chariot battle in history, involving thousands of chariots. I was there, an aging veteran recounts to wide-eyed recruits in the barracks. Our scouts brought back false information, leading us into a trap. Hittite chariots attacked from nowhere, while we were making camp. The king himself rallied us, charging the enemy alone while his cowardly officers fled. This is the official version of events, immortalized in boastful relief carvings and inscriptions in numerous Egyptian temples. Ramesses claimed a great victory, but the historical reality was likely closer to a draw. What is certain is that both sides suffered heavy casualties, eventually leading to the world's first recorded peace treaty 16 years later. A copy of this treaty, written on silver tablets, was displayed in Pyramesses. Good brotherhood is established. Firm peace is established. It reads, Egypt and Hatti, the Hittite Empire, are at peace, and so shall they be forever. Ramesses I ruled for an astonishing 66 years, becoming almost a living institution. He built on a scale unseen since the Pyramid Age, completing his father's temple at Abydos, greatly expanding the temples at Karnak and Luxor, and building his own magnificent temples, including Abu Simbel far to the south in Nubia. Number King has built so much since the time of the gods, boasts a royal architect. The golden age in detail, life and bureaucracy, to be ascribed, so that your body may be sleek, your hand will be soft. You are the one who sits grandly in your house. Your servants answer quickly. Beer is poured copiously. Everyone who sees you rejoices in good humor. Translation: be a scribe so you don't have to do real work, get to sit all day, and drink lots of beer. Ramesses' monuments would last until the stars fell from the sky. He was not exaggerating. Ramesses erected so many statues, obelisks, and buildings that later pharaohs stopped trying to match him, and simply carved their names onto his monuments. He was so prolific that today, almost any large ancient Egyptian statue is jokingly considered probably Ramesses II. This period is well known to us due to the extensive archaeological remains. and also because of the remarkable preservation of written materials. In Deir el-Medina, the village of the tomb workers, thousands of written records on papyrus and limestone chips give us an unprecedented glimpse into daily life. One such record shows that the workmen were not immune to human failings. A worker named Paneb is accused by his colleagues of stealing tools, sexually harassing women, and bribing officials. He's a bad man, the complaint states. He sits and drinks with those who should judge him. Other texts show the workers trading items, arguing over property, exchanging love poetry, and solving family issues. A physician's records list treatments for everything from eye infections to snake bites. A dream interpreter records people's nightmares and explains their meaning. I dreamed my teeth fell out, an anxious man tells the interpreter. That means someone in your house will die, is the grim reply. These texts reveal a surprisingly recognizable society, where people gossip, fall in love, argue with neighbors, and worry about their health and finances. Just like us, despite the 3,300-year gap. After the extraordinarily long reign of Ramses I, his 13th son, many others having predeceased their aged father, took the throne as Marenta. Almost immediately, he faced a serious threat and invasion by a coalition of Libyan tribes and mysterious groups, called the Sea Peoples, mentioned in Egyptian texts. They came from the islands and the coasts, a military officer reports, pointing to the western delta, where fierce fighting is underway. Strange warriors with feathered headdresses and foreign weapons. They brought their wives and children in carts, seeking to settle, not merely to plunder. Marenta crushed this initial invasion, immortalizing his victory on a stele that contains the first known written mention of Israel as a people, but the Sea Peoples would return in greater numbers a few decades later, contributing to a perfect storm of crisis that would end the New Kingdom. By the time of Ramses I, circa 11,861,155 BCE, Egypt was battered by a multitude of threats. New Sea Peoples invasions, economic problems, climate change affecting harvests, and internal corruption. While Ramses I successfully fought off the Sea Peoples, recording his victory in detailed relief carvings at his mortuary temple. The cost of these wars drained Egypt's resources. The treasury is empty, a royal official confesses to a colleague as they review the accounts. We cannot pay the tomb workers. The granaries are less than half of last year's amount. Internal documents show the government struggling to maintain basic services. Inflation soared, driving up grain prices. Corruption meant that supplies intended for the workmen often disappeared before reaching them. The workers at Deir el-Medina staged multiple strikes. When their pay was delayed, something unthinkable in earlier, more prosperous times. The Harem conspiracy and the end of the New Kingdom. The death of Ramses I came under violent circumstances. He was the victim of a Harem conspiracy. A group of officials, along with one of his secondary wives, who wanted her son on the throne, plotted to kill him, using what court protocols call evil sorcery, as well as more practical methods. They brewed potions, and horrified witness testifies during the trial of the conspirators. They created wax figures to cast spells upon His Majesty. The chief of the guard was bribed to allow them access to the king's chambers. Whether by magic or mundane means, the plot partially succeeded. Recent CT scans of Ramses I's mummy show that his throat was cut. Although the conspirators failed to install their chosen successor on the throne, the remaining Ramesside kings, Ramesses I, presided over Egypt's gradual decline. The empire shrank, with territories in Asia lost to rising local powers. The economy struggled with inflation and corruption. And in Thebes, the priesthood of Ammon was once again becoming a state within a state. By the end of the New Kingdom circa 1069 BCE, Egypt had effectively split again. The high priests of Ammon controlled Thebes and the south, while a new dynasty of kings ruled from Tanis in the delta. The imperial age was over, and Egypt entered the third intermediate period. As night falls on the New Kingdom, Egypt is starkly different from the isolated, pyramid-building society of the Old Kingdom. It has experienced imperial glory and religious revolution, engaged with international powers, and absorbed foreign influence. Its art, literature, and culture reached heights of sophistication, but the strain of maintaining an empire, coupled with shifting climatic conditions and internal corruption, left it vulnerable. Looking back from your comfortable modern perspective, you might wonder how such a mighty civilization could decline. But nothing lasts forever, not even Egypt, with its obsession with eternity. The same environmental changes, resource pressures, and human flaws that threaten modern societies affected the ancient people just as severely. As you drift off to sleep, remember how the Egyptians themselves viewed these cycles of prosperity and decline. They saw history not as a straight line of progress, but as a constant struggle to maintain met against the forces of chaos. In their worldview, order had to be actively preserved through correct rituals, ethical behavior, and strong leadership. When this failed, chaos inevitably returned. Unlike your modern world of constant change and innovation, the Egyptians idealized stability and continuity. Their greatest kings were celebrated not for creating new things, but for restoring the perfect order established at creation. Ramses was great, not because he was original, but because he so perfectly embodied the traditional royal role. Settling back into your bed with its factory frame and synthetic materials that would confuse an ancient Egyptian, remember that their world, for all its differences, was filled with people who shared our fundamental hopes and fears for safety, health, meaning, and some small measure of happiness in an uncertain world. Invasion from Kush and Assyria. Dawn breaks over a divided Egypt once again. It is approximately 945 BCE, and the glorious days of the New Kingdom are long past. Egypt has entered the third intermediate period, with power fragmented between different rulers in different regions. The country that once dominated the ancient world has turned inward, its borders shrunken, its influence weakened. The two lands are no longer united. Sai is an old priest at Karnak Temple. In the north, kings of foreign blood rule from Tanis. These kings of foreign blood are the rulers of the 22nd dynasty, descendants of Libyan mercenaries who had settled in Egypt generations earlier. Their founder, King Shoshenq I, was a military chief before he seized the throne. Though technically foreigners, these Libyan kings fully adopted Egyptian culture, ruling as traditional pharaohs. Let's visit Tanis, their delta capital, where King Shoshenq is preparing for something that has not happened for a long time. An Egyptian military campaign outside its borders. Solomon is dead. A scout reports to Shoshenq, referring to the Israelite king. His kingdom is divided and weakened. Now is the time to reassert Egyptian control in Canaan. Shoshenq nods, studying a papyrus map of the Levant. Prepare the army. We march in a month. This campaign, around 925 BCE, would be recorded in Egyptian texts as a great victory. More significantly, it is also mentioned in the Bible as the invasion of Shishak, providing a rare point of synchronization between Egyptian history and biblical chronology. But this brief resurgence of Egyptian power would not last. By 800 BCE, Egypt had fragmented further, with several dynasties ruling different parts of the country simultaneously. To the south, the Kushite kingdom in modern Sudan was growing stronger, its rulers absorbing Egyptian culture and religion, just as Egypt had once dominated Nubia. Let's jump to 728 BCE, when King Pi of Kush leads his army north, into Egypt itself. Unlike previous invaders, the Kushite kings saw themselves as legitimate restorers of Egyptian tradition, worshipping Egyptian gods, especially Amun, and using Egyptian script and royal symbols. We come not as conquerors but as restorers, Pi declares to the people of Thebes, who welcome his army. The true ways of Egypt have been forgotten. We will revive them. The Kushite rulers established the 25th dynasty, unifying Egypt under their control. They embarked on an ambitious program of temple restoration and cultural revival, considering themselves the saviors of Egyptian civilization from decline. They built Egyptian-style pyramids for their burials at Jebel Barkal in their Nubian homeland, actually building more pyramids than the Egyptians built in Egypt. This Kushite revival would be interrupted by a new threat from the east, the expanding Assyrian Empire, the superpower of its time. Under kings like Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, Assyrian armies invaded Egypt around 671 BCE. Unlike previous invaders who adopted Egyptian culture, the Assyrians were primarily interested in plunder and tribute. They sacked Thebes in 663 BCE, an event so shocking it was mentioned in the Bible. As a cautionary tale, the Assyrians show no respect for our temples, a stunned priest says. Surveying the damage at Karnak, they took the gold, killed the sacred animals, mocked our gods. Not even the Hyksos did that. The Assyrian conquest was brutal but relatively brief. As their empire became overstretched, they withdrew, leaving Egypt in the hands of client rulers in the delta city of Sais. These Sate kings, the 26th dynasty, managed to reunite Egypt around 664 BCE, beginning the period historians call the Late Period. The Sate kings, particularly Psammetichus and Necho-e, attempted to restore Egypt's greatness while maintaining independence from Assyria. They recruited Greek mercenaries, built Egypt's navy, and even sponsored trade and exploration expeditions. One such expedition reportedly sailed all the way around Africa, a journey that took 3 years. The Greeks are excellent fighters, an Egyptian officer comments, watching the mercenaries train. But they have strange ideas. They argue with their commanders and expect to be told why orders are given, not just obey. This growing Greek presence in Egypt foreshadowed later events. Trading colonies were established, notably at Naucratis in the Delta, creating communities of foreign merchants who lived under their own laws, while respecting Egyptian authority. Under the Sate kings, Egyptian culture experienced a renaissance. Artists and craftsmen deliberately copied the styles of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, creating what scholars call archaic works, new art that was intentionally made to look ancient. Cultural revival and the end of liberty. We study the works of the old masters. A sculptor explains in his workshop, the ancients understood perfection. We aim to bring back what was lost. This cultural revival extended to religion, with a renewed emphasis on traditional cults and practices. The mummification of animals reached industrial scales, with millions of mummified cats, birds, and other creatures being prepared as offerings to the gods. Every ibis contains the essence of Thoth, a priest explains. Watching workers prepare the bird mummies, every cat embodies Bastet. Through them, the worshipper makes connection with the divine. Despite this cultural flourishing, Egypt could not escape geopolitical reality. As Assyria declined, a new power rose, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar I, and behind Babylon, the growing might of the Persian Empire. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses I invaded Egypt, defeating the last Sate king, Psammetichus I. Egypt became a province, or satrapy, of the Persian Empire, ruled by a Persian governor, with Egyptian administrators handling the day-to-day affairs. Cambyses quickly discovered that conquering Egypt was easier than governing it. According to later sources, he committed a grave sacrilege by killing the sacred Apis bull at Memphis. He stabbed the living god with his dagger. A horrified priest whispers, describing the scene. The bull fell, bleeding onto the sacred ground. Cambyses laughed while the people wept. While this story may be exaggerated or even fabricated, it reflected the Egyptians' view of their Persian rulers as impious foreigners, who did not respect Egyptian traditions. Persian rule was not entirely negative for Egypt. The Persians invested in infrastructure, clearing and extending the canal systems, and generally maintaining order. Some Persian kings even represented themselves as traditional pharaohs when dealing with Egyptian subjects, having themselves depicted in Egyptian style on temple reliefs. The great king understands he must look like a pharaoh to us, explains an Egyptian official serving under the Persians. He wears the double crown in the Egyptian temples, even if he wears Persian robes in Persepolis. The first period of Persian rule, the 27th dynasty, lasted until 404 BCE, when Egypt successfully rebelled and established a series of short-lived native dynasties. These last native Egyptian rulers, notably Nectanebo I, once again revived traditional culture, building temples and promoting Egyptian religion. But independence would not last. In 343 BCE, the Persians reconquered Egypt, beginning the 31st dynasty. This second Persian period was harsher than the first, with higher taxes and less consideration for Egyptian sentiment. "They take everything," complains a farmer as tax collectors tally his grain harvest. First a share for the local temple, then the provincial governor, then the satrap, and finally for the great king himself. What is left for my family? Persian rule might have continued indefinitely, were it not for the most unexpected event of all, the arrival of Alexander the Great. In 332 BCE, fresh from defeating Persian forces in Asia Minor, the young Macedonian conqueror entered Egypt with his army. To the surprise of the Egyptians, Alexander was welcomed not as another foreign oppressor, but as a liberator from Persian rule. He made a conscious effort to respect Egyptian traditions, journeying to the famous Oracle of Ammon at the Siwa Oasis, where the priest supposedly confirmed his divine status. The god recognized him as the son of Ammon, declares a priest who witnessed the oracle's proclamation. He is pharaoh by divine right, not just by conquest. Whether Alexander genuinely believed this or simply understood its political value, he allowed himself to be depicted as a traditional Egyptian king. During his brief stay in Egypt, he made his most lasting contribution by founding the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast. Here, where the Egyptian land meets the Great Sea, Alexander tells his architects, surveying the coastal site, "We will build a new type of city, a bridge between Egypt and Greece, between East and West, the greatest trading center in our new world." Alexandria would indeed become the most important city in the Eastern Mediterranean. But Alexander would not live to see it, leaving Egypt to continue his campaign against Persia. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of only 32. The last dynasty, the Ptolemies and Cleopatra, Alexander's death triggered a power struggle among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions, who established himself as ruler and eventually declared himself king, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty, the last to rule ancient Egypt. Let's visit Alexandria, around 250 BCE, during the reign of Ptolemy I Philadelphus. The city has been transformed from Alexander's initial plans into a metropolitan marvel, with a population approaching 500,000, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. No city compares to Alexandria, boasts a Greek merchant as he guides you through the bustling streets. We have the world's largest library, over 500,000 books. The lighthouse at Pharos, over 100 meters tall, guides ships into our harbor. Scholars, poets, and philosophers from all lands come here to study. The Ptolemaic kings ruled as traditional pharaohs when interacting with their Egyptian subjects, depicted on temple walls in traditional royal regalia, performing ancient rituals. But they were also Hellenistic monarchs, speaking Greek, celebrating Greek festivals, and maintaining a court culture that was thoroughly Greek. In Alexandria, "I speak Greek and wear Greek clothing," explains an Egyptian official serving in the royal administration. "When I return home to the countryside, I speak Egyptian and make offerings at our local temple. We live in two worlds now." This cultural division characterized Ptolemaic Egypt. The ruling elite was predominantly Greek, living mostly in Alexandria and a few other Greek-style cities. The vast majority of the population remained Egyptian, continuing their ancient traditions in the countryside with little change. The Ptolemies were pragmatic rulers who understood the importance of Egyptian religion. In maintaining social stability, they built magnificent temples across Egypt, including Edfu, Dendera, and Philae. The king may worship Greek gods in his palace. A priest at Edfu comments as stonecutters carve hieroglyphic inscriptions, but here, He must honor Horus, as pharaohs have done since the beginning of time. Despite this cultural accommodation, tensions between the Greek ruling class and the Egyptian population existed. Periodic revolts erupted, especially in Upper Egypt. By the late Ptolemaic period, Rome had become the dominant Mediterranean power. Egypt's vast grain resources made it critically important to Roman food security. The final act of the Ptolemaic dynasty and independent ancient Egypt came with its most famous Egyptian ruler, who was not, in fact, Egyptian, Cleopatra V. Born into the Ptolemaic royal family, she was of Greek Macedonian descent, not Egyptian, though she was reportedly the first of her dynasty to actually learn the Egyptian language. The queen speaks to the temple priests in their own tongue, reports an astonished courtier. She performs the rituals perfectly, without scribes reading the words for her. The priests say no ruler since the great Ramses has shown such respect for tradition. Cleopatra's intelligence, charisma, and political acumen made her a formidable player in the power struggles of her time. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were both romantic attachments and strategic alliances aimed at preserving Egypt's independence in the face of Roman expansion. Rome can crush us with its legions, Cleopatra supposedly told her advisors. Therefore, we must make ourselves too valuable to be crushed. For a time, the strategy worked. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra solidified her rule. Following his assassination, she aligned herself with Mark Antony against Caesar's heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus. But when Antony and Cleopatra were defeated at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, the end was inevitable. Rather than be paraded in a Roman triumph, Cleopatra famously committed suicide in 30 BCE. Tradition holds that she used a poisonous snake, though modern scholars debate this. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic kingdom ended, and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. Egypt has fallen before, a priest muses at Philae as news of Cleopatra's death spreads. The Hyksos, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks all have ruled us, yet Egypt remains. Our gods remain. As long as the Nile flows, Egypt cannot truly die. He was partly right. Roman rule would last for centuries, followed by Byzantine, Arab, Ottoman, and eventually British rule. Political independence was lost, but Egyptian culture proved surprisingly resilient, adapting and evolving while retaining continuity with its ancient roots. The ancient temples continued to function well into the Roman period. Hieroglyphic script, which had become specialized in the Ptolemaic era, continued to be used for religious texts until the 5th centuries. Traditional Egyptian religion gradually gave way to Christianity and then Islam, but elements of ancient beliefs were sometimes incorporated into these new faiths. As the sun sets on Ptolemaic Egypt, ending the last Egyptian-style kingdom and beginning direct foreign rule, it is worth reflecting on the extraordinary longevity of ancient Egyptian civilization. From its foundation around 3100 BCE to Cleopatra's death in 30 BCE, Egypt maintained cultural continuity for over 3,000 years, a span of time difficult for the modern mind to fully grasp. For comparison, we are closer in time to Cleopatra than she was to the builders of the Great Pyramid. When Cleopatra visited the pyramids at Giza, they were already ancient monuments, older to her than medieval castles are to us. This incredible temporal depth is what makes ancient Egypt so compelling. As you lie in your comfortable, modern bed, surrounded by technology that would seem like magic even to the most sophisticated Alexandrian scholar, remember that the Egyptians were innovators and adapters, too. They survived climate change, political collapse, foreign invasions, and cultural transformation, all while preserving the core elements of their identity. Unlike us, insulated by our modern comforts, they lived with a constant awareness of how quickly prosperity could turn to famine, health to disease, and order to chaos. Perhaps this awareness is what fueled their obsession with permanence. Their massive stone monuments, their careful preparation for the afterlife. In a world where so much could change so quickly, They strove to create something that would truly last forever. And in a way, they succeeded not through mummification or pyramid building, but through the power of their ideas and symbols, which continue to captivate us thousands of years later. As your mind drifts off to sleep, carried along by the current of ancient history, remember that in some small way, you are helping to keep ancient Egypt alive in human memory, just as they always hope to be remembered forever. It is the year 30 BCE. Roman troops march through the streets of Alexandria as locals watch with a mixture of resignation and curiosity. Egypt has fallen to Rome, and the new ruler, Octavian, soon to be named Augustus, has a few immediate practical concerns. Take me to the royal treasury, he orders his officers as they enter the Ptolemaic palace and find Cleopatra's son. Roman pragmatism eliminating the threat, he cannot be allowed to live. Caesarion, the teenage son of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, is quickly tracked down and executed. Egypt, with its vast grain supplies and incredible wealth, is too valuable to risk having any potential leader of a revolt emerge. But Octavian is shrewd enough to realize that Egypt is not just another conquest. The Egyptians will never accept direct Roman rule, a local advisor tells him. For thousands of years, they have been ruled by living gods, the pharaohs. Their entire society is built around that concept. Octavian nods, thinking, then Rome will respect their traditions up to a point. I will be their pharaoh, though I will never use that title in Rome. Egypt will be my personal province, not the Senate's. This pragmatic approach set the pattern for Roman rule in Egypt. Officially, Egypt became the emperor's personal property, governed by a prefect appointed directly by him. No Roman senator was even allowed to visit Egypt without imperial permission. It was simply too wealthy and strategically vital to risk becoming a power base for potential rivals. Let's visit Alexandria in the early Roman period, round 10th. The city remains one of the great metropolitan centers of the ancient world. Though its character is changing, Roman soldiers and officials now walk the streets alongside Greeks and Egyptians. The Romans are much like the Ptolemies in many ways. An Alexandrian merchant explains as he shows you the city. They keep Greek as the language of administration. They respect local customs to an extent. But make no mistake, they are here to extract wealth. For the common Egyptians, especially in the countryside, the transition to Roman rule meant a heavier tax burden. The Romans implemented a more efficient and less lenient system of taxation and census taking. Every person had to register for a census every 14 years and could not leave their native village without permission. The tax collectors know exactly what I own, down to the last chicken, grumbles a farmer in the Fayum region. They even count the date palms separates from other trees, taxing each one differently. And heaven help you if you try to hide anything. This strict administration made Egypt Rome's wealthiest province, providing tax revenues that reportedly accounted for up to 1/3 of the entire imperial budget. Most importantly, Egypt became the granary of Rome, exporting massive volumes of grain to feed the growing population of the capital city. The emperor promises the Roman mob bread and circuses. Well, we provide the bread, an Alexandrian merchant says. Alexandria remains the cultural capital of the Eastern Mediterranean, and its famous library and museum continue to attract scholars. Though with less prestige under Roman oversight, the city is now divided into three main communities: Greeks, Egyptians, and Jews, with the Romans serving as the ruling elite. While Alexandria becomes increasingly cosmopolitan, traditional Egyptian culture holds stronger in the countryside and in Upper Egypt. The Romans, like the Ptolemies before them, understood the importance of maintaining Egyptian religious traditions. Let's visit the Dendera temple during the reign of Emperor Tiberius 1437. The walls display relief carvings of Roman emperors depicted as traditional pharaohs, making offerings to the Egyptian gods. The accompanying hieroglyphic inscriptions give the full Egyptian royal titulary for the emperor, calling him son of Ra and beloved of Ptah. The emperor will never visit this temple, a priest explains. but his name and image must be shown performing the proper rituals. This maintains cosmic order, regardless of who is physically sitting on the throne of Egypt. The Romans were practical imperialists. They saw no contradiction in the emperor being depicted as a pharaoh in Egypt, while being the princeps first citizen in Rome. Different cultural contexts demanded different presentations of imperial power. Egyptian religion continued to evolve in the Roman period with increasing syncretism. The blending of deities and religious practices from different traditions. Isis, already popular throughout the Mediterranean in the Ptolemaic period, became even more widely venerated, with temples dedicated to her, even in Britain. Isis encompasses all goddesses, explains a priestess at her temple in Alexandria. The Greeks call her Demeter or Aphrodite. The Romans relate her to Ceres or Venus, but we know her true nature as Isis, the throne, the mother of Horus, the one who reassembled Osiris. Another Egyptian deity that gained international popularity was Serapis, a hybrid god created during the Ptolemaic period by combining aspects of Osiris and Apis with a Greek appearance but Egyptian conceptual roots. Serapis became the perfect deity for a multicultural empire. Tensions and the animal cult's animal worship remained distinctly Egyptian and continued into the Roman period. At sites like Tuna el-Gebel, vast catacombs held millions of mummified ibises, baboons, falcons, and other sacred animals. The industry of producing these animal mummies employed thousands of people. Every ibis is a prayer made physical, explains a priest at Tuna el-Gebel, showing rows of mummified birds in pottery jars. The worshipper pays to have a bird mummified and dedicated to Thoth. The more offerings, the more propitious the god becomes. Modern analysis of these animal mummies shows that demand sometimes outstripped supply, with many ibis mummies containing only a feather or an eggshell rather than a whole bird, an ancient version of religious fraud. While traditional religion continued, social and legal divisions stiffened under Roman rule. The population was officially categorized into Romans, a privileged minority, Greeks, citizens of Greek cities, and Egyptians, everyone else. Each group lived under different legal systems and paid different taxes. As an Egyptian, I pay the full poll tax, explains a craftsman from a village in Middle Egypt. The Greeks pay less, the Romans pay nothing. If I could somehow become a Greek citizen, my family's life would be much easier. This rigid social stratification created resentment that sometimes spilled into violence, especially in Alexandria, where the Greek, Jewish, and Egyptian communities often clashed. Major riots occurred in 38, 66, and 115,117, the latter of which devastated the Jewish community of Alexandria. Despite these tensions, the daily lives of most Egyptians continued largely as they had for centuries. Farmers still worked the fields, using methods recognizable by their ancestors 1,000 years prior. Life in the villages still centered around the local temples and traditional festivals. My great-grandfather worked this same field, a farmer says as he diverts water from an irrigation canal to his crops. His father before him, and his father before that. The faces of those who rule may change, but the Nile, the soil, and our labor remain constant. This continuity is reflected in material culture. Pottery forms, agricultural tools, and household objects show remarkable consistency over centuries, even millennia. Innovation happened, but slowly and incrementally. Meanwhile, subtle changes were occurring. By the 2nd centuries, hieroglyphic writing was becoming increasingly specialized, used mostly for formal religious inscriptions by a shrinking number of trained scribes. Demotic, the cursive script derived from hieroglyphs, was used for everyday Egyptian writing, while Greek remained the language of administration. A papyrus from this period illustrates the linguistic complexity of Roman Egypt. It contains a legal contract written in Greek, with signatures in Greek from the officials, in Demotic from the Egyptian parties involved, and in Latin from the presiding Roman magistrate. 3 writing systems on a single document. My son is learning Greek at school, an Egyptian farmer says proudly. He helps me read the tax notices and write appeals when the assessments are too high. But at the temple, he studies the ancient script, so he may be a priest one day. The 3rd centuries brought increasing instability to the Roman Empire, from which Egypt suffered accordingly. Political turmoil in Rome led to economic chaos. The currency was debased, inflation soared, and tax demands increased to fund constant warfare. Climate change may also have been reducing the level of the Nile flood. The coins they pay us with are more copper than silver now, complains a merchant in Alexandria. Prices are rising every month. People are hoarding grain instead of selling it. The prefect is sending soldiers to requisition the harvest at spear point. Christianity and the end of the old gods during this unsettled period. A new faith was gaining adherents. Christianity. Egypt became an early center of Christian thought and practice, with Alexandria producing influential theologians, and the surrounding deserts becoming home to early monasticism. In the deserts, away from worldly distraction, we find God, explains an early Christian anchorite, living in a small cave in the Wadi Natron. Christianity spread first in the cities, especially among the Greek-speaking population, then gradually into the rural areas where traditional Egyptian religion remained strongest. The new faith sometimes absorbed elements of the older beliefs, particularly concerning the afterlife and the veneration of holy figures. Look how they depict their Christ, a traditional priest whispers, observing a Christian funeral, the arms outstretched, like Osiris. Their saints receive prayers like our gods. They preserve the bodies of holy men, just as we preserve our sacred mummies. They have taken our customs and given them new names. By the 4th centuries, Christianity gained imperial backing when Emperor Constantine legalized the religion, and later emperors made it the official faith of Rome. Traditional Egyptian temples began to lose state funding and faced increasing restrictions. The Philae Temple on an island in the Nile near Aswan is a stark example of this transition. As one of the last functioning centers of traditional Egyptian religion, we maintain the ancient ways. A priest tells you at Philae, around 390s. People still come from far villages for oracles and healing. The goddess Isis has protected her sanctuary through many troubles. She will continue. His confidence was misplaced. In 535s, the Emperor Justinian ordered the temple closed. Its walls were later repurposed for Christian worship, the Egyptian religious images plastered over, and crosses carved into the ancient relief sculptures. The last known hieroglyphic inscription dates to 384s, carved at Philae. The last Demotic text was written in 452s. With this, the ancient Egyptian writing system, which had endured for nearly 4,000 years, fell silent. Its secrets were eventually lost until the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone in the 19th century. But even as the traditional script and formal religion faded, elements of ancient Egyptian culture persisted in the Coptic Christian tradition that emerged. Coptic, the final stage of the ancient Egyptian language, written with Greek letters plus a few extra signs, preserved the indigenous tongue of Egypt into the Middle Ages. Coptic Christianity maintained distinctive Egyptian features, including artistic styles reminiscent of pharaonic art, architectural elements of the ancient temples, and even some religious practices with ancient roots, such as the veneration of saints, which paralleled the earlier cult of local gods. "We are Christians now," an Egyptian monk tells you at a Coptic monastery around 500s. "But we remain Egyptians. Our fathers built the pyramids and carved the sphinxes. That heritage flows in our blood, even as we pray to Christ." This cultural continuity is perhaps ancient Egypt's most remarkable achievement. Few civilizations have maintained such a lineage across millennia and left such an indelible mark on the human imagination. The monuments, art, and concepts of ancient Egypt continue to captivate us today, fulfilling the deepest desire of the ancient Egyptians themselves, to be remembered forever. As twilight falls on ancient Egyptian civilization, it is worth reflecting on what made it so extraordinary. It was not just the pyramids, the mummies, or the complex mythology. Impressive as these were, It was the Egyptians' unique relationship with permanence and change, their ability to absorb foreign influence while retaining core cultural elements, and their profound belief in a cosmic order that could be maintained by correct human action. They faced the same challenges we do: climate change, resource pressure, political instability, technological disruption. Yet, they created a society that endured longer than any other in human history. Their story is not just about pharaohs and monuments, but about how ordinary people found meaning and created beauty in a world full of uncertainty. Unlike your modern bed with its factory frame and machine-woven sheets, the ancient Egyptians slept on beds made by hand, often simple wooden frames with reed mats or strapwork weaving. But like you, they dreamed. They worried about tomorrow. They found joy in small pleasures, and they hoped to be remembered when they were gone. The year is 30 BCE. Roman troops are marching through the streets of Alexandria. As locals watch with a mixture of resignation and curiosity, Egypt has fallen to Rome, and the new ruler, Octavian, soon to be named Augustus, has a few immediate, practical concerns. "Take me to the royal treasury," he orders his officers as they enter the Ptolemaic palace and find Cleopatra's son. Revival through the Rosetta Stone, 19th century. It is strange to think. Muses, an Arab merchant traveling through Egypt around 850s, looking at the weathered face of the Great Sphinx, that no one remembers who built this, or why. It just exists, like a mountain or the sea. For over 1,000 years, the ancient Egyptian language and script remained unreadable. The magnificent architecture still stood, but their meaning was lost. Travelers from medieval Europe and the Islamic world admired these structures, but could only guess at their purpose. The Renaissance brought renewed European interest in Egypt, but still without understanding. In the 1600s, the German Jesuit Athanasius Kircher tried to translate the hieroglyphs, believing them to be purely symbolic rather than phonetic. He was wrong about almost everything. Yet, his work maintained an interest in ancient Egypt. This misunderstanding of Egypt as a land of mystery and hidden wisdom became ingrained in the European imagination. Secretly, however, true Egyptian wisdom was influencing Western culture throughout this time via Greek writers. Egypt's architectural legacy was also preserved in the obelisks the Roman emperors had transported to their capital. The true turning point came with Napoleon Bonaparte's invasion of Egypt in 1798. Along with his troops, Napoleon brought over 150 civilian scholars to study every aspect of Egypt, ancient and modern. Record everything. Napoleon instructed the scholars. Every monument, every inscription, every plant and animal. Egypt is a treasure trove of knowledge, and we shall unlock it. This expedition led to the monumental description d'Egypte, description of Egypt. More importantly, in 1799, French soldiers discovered a large stone near the town of Rosetta inscribed with 3 types of writing: hieroglyphic, demotic, and ancient Greek. This Rosetta Stone would eventually provide the key to deciphering the hieroglyphs. The breakthrough did not come immediately, taking years of work by scholars, most notably the Englishman Thomas Young and the Frenchman Jean-François Champollion. "I've got it," Champollion reportedly exclaimed in 1822, rushing into his brother's office. He had cracked the code. Hieroglyphs were not purely symbolic. They represented sounds, much like our alphabet, albeit with added complexities. With this discovery, ancient Egypt began to speak again after a silence of nearly 1,400 years. Suddenly, the temple walls, the papyri, and the tomb inscriptions could be read, revealing not mystical secrets, but the practical details of administration, religion, and daily life. The 19th and 20th centuries saw an explosion of Egyptological research. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 captured the world's imagination. The treasures found inside, including the famous gold mask, traveled the globe, creating Egyptomania. As archaeological methods improved, excavations shifted focus from spectacular royal tombs to humble settlements. helping us understand the lives of ordinary ancient Egyptians. We used to think the pyramids were built by slaves, a modern Egyptologist explains at Giza. Now we know they were built by paid workers, many of whom worked seasonally during the Nile flood. We found their village, their tools, even their graffiti joking about the king. Today, millions of tourists visit Egypt annually to admire its ancient monuments. But why does ancient Egypt continue to captivate us? What is unique about this particular civilization? Part of the answer lies in its incredible longevity. Ancient Egyptian culture maintained a remarkable continuity for over 3,500 years. By comparison, the entire history of ancient Greece spans about 1,500 years. This extraordinary continuity stemmed from several factors. Egypt's geography provided natural protection, and the predictable annual flooding of the Nile created agricultural stability. The Egyptians developed cultural and religious systems that stressed stability and resisted rapid change. Their ideal was not progress, but the maintenance of what they considered the perfect arrangement established at creation. Another factor is the physical presence of its monuments. The pyramids at Giza remain the only surviving wonder of the ancient world. Their massive stone blocks defy time. I've worked on archaeological sites all over the world, a veteran excavator admits, but nothing compares to that moment each morning when the sun touches the Great Pyramid. For a few minutes, it shines gold, just as it did when new, and you feel connected across thousands of years to the people who built it. Egypt's obsession with death and the afterlife also contributes to its allure. They weren't morbid, a museum curator explains. Quite the opposite, they loved life so much they wanted it to continue forever. Everything in their tombs was meant to ensure they could enjoy the afterlife, just as they enjoyed this one. The lessons of permanence, perhaps most importantly, it is Egypt's role as a cultural foundation. Alongside Mesopotamia, it represents one of humanity's earliest experiments with civilization itself. Egypt influenced the ancient Israelites, the Nubians, the Greeks, who saw Egypt as a source of wisdom, and through them, the Romans and later European societies. Christianity incorporated elements of Egyptian religion. Islamic scholars preserved and transmitted ancient knowledge. Even today, Egyptian symbols and concepts permeate our world, often without our knowing. The pyramid appears on the American dollar bill. Obelisks stand in Washington, London, and Paris. Our 12-month calendar is partly derived from the Egyptian system. Look at gravestones. An architectural historian suggests those obelisks are Egyptian. The pyramidical monuments are Egyptian. Even the sculptures of angels have predecessors in Egyptian winged protective deities. Egyptian influence extends to literature, film, and popular culture. They believed you couldn't separate cosmic order from social justice, explains a scholar of ancient ethics. For them, mistreating people or damaging the natural world wasn't just morally wrong, it threatened the entire universal balance. That's not so different from modern environmental thinking. The Egyptians built monuments meant for eternity, but their civilization eventually faded. They preserved their dead with meticulous care, but most of their mummies were eventually destroyed or displayed in museums. They developed writing to make their words permanent, but their language became unreadable for more than a millennium. Despite these setbacks, they achieved a kind of immortality, not the literal physical one they sought, but the immortality of cultural memory and influence. We still speak their names, visit their monuments, study their language, and reflect on their beliefs. In this way, they continue to live, fulfilling the deepest desire expressed in countless Egyptian texts. May my name endure upon the earth. Close your eyes now and imagine standing before the Great Sphinx at sunset. The ancient stone warm on your hand as you touch its weathered face. For a moment, time dissolves. You are connected to everyone who has ever stood there, from pharaohs and priests to Napoleon's scholars. Like the gentle currents of the Nile, eternally flowing north, human consciousness continues, carrying a piece of Egypt with it. Allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep, perhaps to dream of golden tombs, desert sands, and a civilization that aimed for forever, and in some small measure, found it.